Hey pushers, welcome back to another episode of Mr. BAP US History. On today's episode, Reconstruction, President and Radical Repercussion Plans, 1865 to 1877. If you appreciate this stuff, make sure you like, subscribe, and ring the bell for notifications. On to the show. All persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. No state shall make or enforce any law which shall abridge the privileges or immunities of citizens of the United States, nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. 14th Amendment, Section 1. Our second quote: I cannot agree to destroy the harmonious working of the Constitution for the sake of getting rid of an unacceptable president, Republican Senator James Grimes, in the impeachment trial of Andrew Johnson. On to the notes. Presidential Reconstruction plans. Abraham Lincoln, his plan: amnesty to most Confederates, states allowed to return to the Union if 10% of their voters took the loyalty oath, and approved the 13th Amendment, which abolished slavery. This became known as the 10% plan. It was based upon his belief, Lincoln's belief, that the Confederate states could not legally secede, and therefore Reconstruction was going to be a simple plan. Congress responded with the Wade-Davis Bill of 1865, which said the southern states had to have an oath of alliance by 51% of states' adult white males. New state governments could not include anyone who fought against the Union, and permanent disenfranchisement of Confederate leaders. Lincoln vetoed this bill, believing it to be too harsh. Lincoln was then assassinated by John Wilkes Booth in 1865. Andrew Johnson becomes the president. Andrew Johnson was a common man, a Unionist Democrat from Tennessee, a war Democrat that was added to the ticket in the 1864 election to get votes from the war Democrats. His views conflicted with the Republican majorities in Congress. He proposed a limited Reconstruction plan, or Johnson's Reconstruction Plan. It guaranteed amnesty to all Southerners who took the loyalty oath except high-ranking Confederate officers. States could re-enter the Union by revoking secession, abolishing slavery, and repudiating Confederate debt. Southern states' response: ex-Confederates did not want to be reconstructed and resisted through violence and political action. The new Southern state legislatures created under Johnson's plan enacted black codes in 1865 and beyond, designed to force former slaves back to plantation labor. Johnson sided with the ex-Confederates and granted them pardons and allowed them back into politics. Republicans were enraged. Anti-black violence erupted in several parts of the South. For example, in Memphis and Arkansas. To protect the former slaves, Congress passed the following laws: the Freedmen's Bureau in 1865, created by congressional Republicans to aid former slaves. It's the first federally funded welfare agency. And the Civil Rights Act of 1866, which declared former slaves to be citizens and granted them equal protection and full access to the court system. Congress versus the President. President Andrew Johnson vetoed the Freedmen's Bureau and the Civil Rights Act. Turned out Johnson was a racist and would actively fight against the radical Republicans who were trying to get equal rights for African Americans after the war. Congress overrode the veto and allowed the Freedmen's Bureau to be created. Congress passed the 14th Amendment in 1868. It guaranteed birthright citizenship, which if you were born in the United States, you were a citizen of the United States. And once you were a citizen, you had equal protection under the laws and guarantees of due process equally. National citizen took priority over state citizenship, a stunning increase in federal power and the balance between the state and the federal government. The radical Republicans were led by Charles Sumner, the very old Charles Sumner in the Senate, who had returned from his injuries that were in the lead up to the Civil War when Preston Brooks beat him with a cane, and Thaddeus Stevens in the House of Representatives. The radical Republicans came up with a radical Reconstruction plan, which was put in place with the Reconstruction Act of 1867, divided the South into 5 military districts under the command of a U.S. general. To re-enter the Union, states had to grant freedmen the right to vote, prohibit ex-Confederate leaders from voting, ratify the 13th and 14th, and eventually the 15th Amendment. The impeachment of Andrew Johnson. In 1867, the radical Republicans were very unhappy with Andrew Johnson and how he was blocking all their plans to rebuild the South. So when he dismissed his Secretary of War, who was a radical Republican, the Congress impeached or put Johnson on trial for infringement of the powers of Congress because he broke the Tenure of Office Act. He was found not guilty by one vote. Those who voted for acquittal were concerned about checks and balances, as the quote from the beginning of this episode. They did not want to break the checks and balances system just to get rid of a bad president, as this would set a dangerous precedent. The election of 1868, Republican Ulysses S. Grant, former Union General, won easily. The 15th Amendment, 1869, guaranteed adult African American males the right to vote, did not eliminate poll taxes, which were having people pay to vote, or literacy tests, which were ways that African Americans were being denied the right to vote. Literacy tests would be that you had to prove that you knew how to read and write before you could vote. Women were not included in the 15th Amendment. The women's suffrage movement split over the 15th Amendment. Lucy Stone and the American Suffrage Association stayed loyal to the Republican, while Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Susan B. Anthony created the National Women's Suffrage Association. The NWSA pushed for a constitutional amendment for women's suffrage and will continue working for the next 40 years, 50 years, till 1920 and the 19th Amendment. Wyoming Territory 1869 was the first to grant women the right to vote. The meaning of freedom. For former slaves, emancipation meant end of punishment, ability to move, reunion of families, opportunity to build churches, business, and communities, to go to school and learn to read. It did not include receiving land that was confiscated by Union troops. Plantations were returned to their former Confederate owners. Wage labor. Free people with no land had few options but to work for their former slave owners. They were paid super low wages. African American women retreated from the workforce. Sharecropping. Sharecropping became the dominant source of labor in the Reconstruction period. Freemen worked as renters, exchanging their labor for the use of land, housing, and tools. They turned over 50% of their harvest to the landlord. This was an unequal relationship, often left the freedmen in debt peonage. It worked with cotton agriculture despite declining cotton prices. It dominated the southern economy, but stagnated growth, innovation, and industrialization. Building black communities. Independent churches became the central community institutions, for example, the National Baptist Convention or the African Methodist Episcopal Church. Desegregation. Sharing public facilities with white was controversial and not immediately pushed for. The Civil Rights Act of 1875 required full and equal protection to jury trials, transportation, and public economics regardless of race. This would be the last meaningful civil rights legislation put through in the Reconstruction period. In the next episode, the end of Reconstruction. Make sure you like, subscribe, add. Until next time, this is Mr. B, AP US History.